Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's Aladdin. Starting off with a reference to the Cave of Wonders, I thought Palisand made a lot of sense. Because Spearow is kind of seen as an asshole, I thought that made sense for representing Iago. The image of a cobra is used consistently throughout this movie to represent Jafar, and the same is going to happen here with Arbok. He's blue, and he looks like a genie, so I've chosen Thundurus to represent Genie. I've chosen Apom to represent Abu, but he's also kind of purple, so he kind of represents Aladdin too. My headcanon for Carpet is that he's actually possessed by Rotom, and we put him in the wash, and now the washing machine is possessed.
It's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's Beauty and the Beast. Starting off with an obvious reference to Lumiere, I've chosen Chandelure to be on this team. Representing our head of the house and kitchen, Mrs. Potts, I've chosen Poltegeist to be on this team as well. When the last petal from the rose falls, it's all over. Say hello, Roselia. A little bit of a pun, but I've actually chosen Chimecho, the Bell Pokemon, to represent Bell. For his size and ferocious appearance, I've chosen Ursaluna to be a direct reference to the Beast. Referenced by a black horse which he rides in the movie, I've chosen Spectrier to represent Gaston.
Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney Pixar's Brave. Starting off this team, I've chosen Decidueye to represent Merida. Stonejourner is going to represent the ruins in which Merida discovers the Wisps. The Wisps will be represented by Lampent. I've chosen Mudsdale to represent Merida's trusty steed, Angus. The role of the wood-carving witch is going to be filled by Miss Magius. Lastly, the terrifying Mordew will be played by Ursaring. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's Encanto. While there may not be anything special about them, it is still most people's favorite, and that's why I've chosen Eevee to represent Mirabelle. Representing Peppa and her gift, I've chosen Castform, the weather Pokemon. I've chosen the strongest of Pokemon to represent the strongest of the Madrigals, Louisa. Who better to make Rose and Rose of Roses than Roserade, representing Isabella? Of course, we have to have the shapeshifter Camilo, and that's why Ditto is on this team. I know I'm not really supposed to talk about him, but he's green and he hides in plain sight, so that's why I've got Kecleon here to represent the one and only Bruno. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's Frozen. Our hero, Elsa, has magic hands and magical ice powers, and that's why Jinx is at the head of this team. I know it doesn't have to be a snowman, but Darmanitan in his Alolan form is going to fill in the role of Olaf. Sven will be played by Stantler because he's like the only Pokemon that is actually a reindeer. I've chosen Golem to fill in the role of the Trolls. I've also chosen Abomasnow to be on this team to represent Marshmallow. Lastly, to round off this team, I've chosen Weavile to represent our villain, Hans of the Southern Isles. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's Hercules. So there are no flying horses in Pokemon, but Glastrier kind of matches Pegasus's color scheme, so Glastrier. I've made this reference before, but Conkeldurr is just an obvious reference to Hercules for his immense strength. Indeedee, in his male form, is going to fill the role of Phil. Because he's literally based on the Hydra, I kind of have to have Hydreigon on this team. Colossal is painfully similar in appearance to the Rock Titan, so I thought he just had to be on this team as well. Lastly, to round off this team, for his hot temper and his color scheme complete with blue flames, I've chosen Charizard in his X form to represent Hades. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney Pixar's Inside Out. Because it literally just gives me this vibe, Virizion is going to represent Disgust. The Fraidy Cat Pokemon Wimpod is appropriately going to represent Fear. Just as appropriately, Anger will be represented by Primeape. There are a few Pokemon with stories as sad as Mimikyu, and that's why Mimikyu is going to represent sadness. Ludicolo absolutely radiates happiness, and that's why he's going to represent joy. He even has the same color scheme. And because he's made of cotton candy, I've chosen Swirlix to represent Bing Bong. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's The Little Mermaid. Firstly, to represent Ariel, a Pokemon who most closely resembles a mermaid, Primarina. If only because he's the only Pokemon that features a trident anywhere in his design, I've chosen Empoleon to represent King Triton. Looking swole as hell, I've chosen Kingler to represent Sebastian. Ariel's best friend in the whole world, Flounder, will be represented by Lantern. I've also chosen Pelipper to represent Scuttle. I know he wasn't the most important character, but I like him. Lastly, representing the wicked sea witch Ursula, I've chosen Malamar to be a part of this team. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's Moana. Because they are both one with the water, I've chosen Vaporeon to represent Moana. The role of Tamatoa will be played by Crabominable. Representing Maui in his giant hawk form, I've chosen Staraptor. Taka is a giant lava monster. And Heatran is also a giant lava monster. So there you go. I thought this one was pretty appropriate. Moana's grandmother will be played by Mantine. Lastly, and definitely not least, I've chosen Combuskin to represent Heihei. My idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's Mulan. Front and center, I've chosen Charmeleon to represent Mushu. Of course, at Mushu's side, representing our lucky cricket, Cricketune. What's the matter? Never seen Black and White before? Pangoro is on this team. Representing our villain Shan Yu with a falcon, I've chosen Staraptor to be on this team. He's a rock type, he's a dragon type, Tyrantrum is the great stone dragon. Lastly on this team, we have a Pokemon that looks like a warrior, looks like a woman, but could be a man. Gardevoir represents Mulan. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's The Black Cauldron. Little Cup Edition. This team is going to start the same as our adventure, with a small little pig named Henwin, or Tepig. Our bard, Flutterflam, is going to be represented by Kricketot. I've chosen Hatena to be on this team to represent the witches who in fact possess the Black Cauldron. I've chosen Honedge to be on this team as a reference to the enchanted sword found by Taran. Creeper, the Horned King's lackey, is going to be represented by Impidimp. And lastly, our villain of the story, the Horned King himself, is going to be represented by Duskull. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney Pixar's The Good Dinosaur. You have to admit, Bayleaf looks a lot like Arlo. So Bayleaf! For this team, I've chosen Spinda to represent Spot, because he's covered in spots. And he's a total spaz. Next on this team, I've chosen Tropius to represent Arlo's papa. I think that Tyrantrum is the perfect choice to represent the Tyrannosaurus Rex, Butch. Our villain of the story, Thunderclap, will be represented by Aerodactyl. And this is Debbie. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney Pixar's The Incredibles. Because he matches the color scheme of the supersuit and has the size to match, I've chosen Buzzwole to represent Mr. Incredible. If for no other reason than they share the same kind of hair, I've chosen Infernape to represent Syndrome. Hitmonlee's stretchy limbs make him the perfect Pokemon to represent Elastigirl. Jolteon's high speed stat and spiky yellow fur make him the perfect Pokemon for representing Dash. Despite having psychic powers, Victini will actually turn invisible when feeling shy, so that's why it's the perfect Pokemon for representing Violet. Lastly, a Pokemon that can use whatever powers it wants, I've chosen Silvally to represent Jack-Jack. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's The Lion King. Obviously, this team is going to feature Pyroar as a reference to Simba or Nala, depends on your preference. Because he has a black mane and he looks mean as hell, I've chosen Luxray to represent Scar. We'll be choosing Zarude for this team to represent Rafiki. Representing all of the hyenas from this movie, Mightyena. Geez, I wonder if the only Pokemon modeled after a meerkat is going to represent Timon. Say hello, Watchog. And of course, Timon would never be complete without his best friend in the whole world, Pumbaa, represented by Pillow-Swine. Here's my idea for a Pokemon team based on Disney's The Princess and the Frog. Because she minces a mean onion and turns into a frog, I thought that Bulbasaur was perfect for representing Tiana. A frog Pokemon evolving using 8 King's Rock is obviously a reference to the Frog Prince, so Politoed will play the role of Naveen. Because of his relationship with Shadows and his evil smile, I've chosen Gengar to fill the role of our villain, Dr. Facilier. Our trumpet-playing gator friend Lewis will be played by Feraligatr. Everyone's best friend from the Bayou, the Firefly Ray, will be played by Volbeat. Lastly, to round off this team, I've chosen Jirachi to fill in the role of Ray's one true love, Evangeline.